Hi, I'm Susan Cauley, and welcome to You're Not Alone Surviving Your Child's Disability. At some point in your disabled child's teenage life, plans for transitioning into adulthood need to be addressed. Preparation for this transition is emotionally and physically challenging, taking lots of time and effort. Here to examine the process of transitioning are Dafina Krouk Gordon, founder and president of the Agency Toward Independent Living and Learning, Inc., also known as TIL, and Barbara Jackin, attorney with the Special Needs Law Group of Mass. They also both happen to be co-authors of a new book entitled Moving Out, which covers all aspects of transitioning, some of which we will discuss today. Congratulations on your book.
Thank you, Susan.
I hope it does well.
We do too.
So let's begin. How do you know when to start planning for transitioning into adulthood at age 22, when you know your child will no longer be eligible for services under the educational system? Which one of you would like to start first?
Well, I'll start. We firmly believe that as early as it is comfortable for you to do so, and usually the signs in your environment, your other family members, will give you an indication when it's time to first start thinking about it, but then actively thinking about it. It's never too early to think about it, and the official transition time begins at age 14.
Okay. That's what I thought. That's when I actually started for my girls. What is the first step in beginning the transitional process? And who should you choose to advise you, if anyone?
Would you like to take that?
Well, you want to take that?
Well, you need to start thinking about where you see your child as an adult. If they're going to be living with you, if they're going to be living independently in a group setting, or maybe with a roommate. So just kind of envision that. And the other is to think about what they're going to be doing all day. Do you see them going on to school, maybe, or maybe in a vocational situation, working with a job coach, or in a day program. So you just kind of need to think about your child, where they are now, and what your vision is for their future.
And what do you think? Do you look to somebody for advisement on like when to start and what to first do?
In writing the book, I think one of the things we really wanted to emphasize was that you should look within your natural environment, for example, in the school system or in the classes where your child is going, to really pair up with other families who might start thinking along the same lines. We also tried to emphasize that there isn't a right or wrong long-term decision. There's only a decision that you want to actively be thinking about. I think, as Barbara said, so much of it comes from understanding what the options are, and that really means shopping around, for lack of a better word. And we find that often that comes from getting to know the state officials educationally and understanding what is going on where you're living,
Right.
so that you can visit, you can start getting a sense of where do you see some possible options. So meeting with the agencies perhaps that are doing adult services is a very good first step, even if your child is still in the teenage years.
You mentioned that is there a value in kind of comradeship sort of with other adults who are going through the same thing? I mean, do you highly recommend that?
From an administrator and planning and agency point of view, I absolutely recommend it. I think it's one of the key things. You, for one thing, don't feel that you're alone. And for the other is you really bounce ideas, things that you didn't even know were possible. One parent, one family member will bring it to your attention, and then you can take off in that direction. I think Barbara's experience has been similar.
Sure, I'd add that too. As a parent, I've gotten some of my best information and ideas from other parents. So you always need to be just constantly networking with people. Even though it might not be natural to you, I think parents will find that it's
I think that's
extremely
great.
helpful.
Yeah. What is a residential assessment and how do you get that? I know that it's supposed to help you plan. What is it exactly?
Well, I think it's extremely important, and I'm going to have Dafina does residential assessments at her agency, but in my experience, I've been a lawyer for, well, over 30 years, and most of my clients are parents of children with disabilities, and I've heard a lot of stories and talked to a lot of people who whose children are in situations that are just not quite right for them, and maybe they entered into it without a lot of planning and forethought. So, you know, their child might want to move out, so they help them get an apartment, but they're home all the time because they're just not equipped to live alone. So
Right.
I think if you can know about the options and really go through a formal assessment, you might come out better in the end. So Dafina can tell you what she does at Till.
Yeah.
There are two key words to assessments that I find, and one is that you want to make sure it's a functional assessment. There are many standardized tests that your child will go through in the school system and also as an adult that tells you what their intellectual quotient might be. Or
Do you have to ask for one?
Yes, you do have to ask for one. In Massachusetts, when you're in the transition years, then you will be getting prepared by the state agency, typically the Department of Developmental Services, to do what is an assessment that determines whether you are eligible for their services. That's really the first step. It gives you an indication of ability level. I think going to an agency that perhaps, or a psychologist, it could be a psychologist who was teamed up with other specialists as well, but really somebody who can give you an idea that what it is functionally, what some of the possibilities are. Because as a parent and as a family, you know your child very differently than how he or she could function outside of your home. So at Till, we really do a residential assessment that includes the principal caregiver, if that happens to be a mother and father, other siblings, because the assessment and the long-term decision usually involves so many stakeholders. It could be in-laws, it could be grandparents who are all part of it, in addition to the individual to find out.
What does the assessment ask? I mean, I'm just curious.
Activities of daily living, personal choices. It asks a lot of personality type questions that will eventually get you to the point, might the person do better living with other people or perhaps living in a very small setting, living alone? What do they dream about and how much in tune is that with the reality of what they can do? It also assesses what do you need to do for preparation to get to the person to the next point of transition, because they may not know how to deal with their banking needs, but that's something very concrete that you can work on.
How do you determine what state agency is responsible for providing services once they turn 22?
Well, as part of the transition process in Massachusetts, when your child is turning 18, your school department is supposed to go over the options, which are typically Department of Developmental Services for people with intellectual disability, which we used to call mental retardation, Department of Mental Health for those with mental illness, or Mass Rehab Commission, which is more vocational agency. And then they identify a lead agency. And then that agency, and of course you get to weigh in on that, but the agency that's identified at 18 is generally the one that will take the lead and help you find services for your child and help you with that whole transitioning out of school and into the adult world.
Okay. Now the big question. What are some of the residential options that a family has to place their child?
Well, I'll start by answering, this is barring who will pay for it or doesn't pay for it, but really to give you a description of what the types of residential services are. Has over the past 30 years since really the model developed, what's typically called a group home setting. And we defined in our book that a group structured setting usually involves 3, 4, 5, perhaps as many as 6, but that's rare in Massachusetts. It would be limited to 5 individuals living together, and it has a very set staffing schedule that you know just when people are coming in. Typically in a group setting, there is probably going to be 24-hour support. And that can either be put together by a state agency that will pay for the entire group, and then you find individuals to live who are compatible, or it can be put together by families independently. The other type of setting is what's called a life share setting, and a life share could be 1 or 2 or as many as 3 individuals living together. And again, you can either find a family who's already existing in the community who want to work and live and incorporate those individuals into their family lifestyle. And then there's another really semi-independent setting where an agency or a family might help their family member get set up in an apartment or a condo, find perhaps a compatible roommate, or live on their own, and then have outside support come in to help them with very specific things. There are new things that are being developed all the time. There are some farm settings where individuals are really a part of making the whole setup work and function. And
Do you have any comments on that?
Well, I think it's mainly determined, well, part of it is preference, of course, from the person, but it's mainly determined by how much help they need.
How do you come to a decision as to what you really, I mean, there are so many options that how do you really grasp onto the right decision or what you feel is the right decision?
There are 3 main criteria that help you to decide just what the ultimate setting will be. And the first one, as Barbara said, is staffing. If the individual is at a point in their life when they need support for most things of daily living to get through the day successfully, that really helps you to figure out that living on their own is just not going to be the right setup. Finances get into it, because if the person needs that much support, supporting them individually, just one person, is probably not going to work. The cost has to be shared. I think really the other criteria is deciding together with the individual and through the assessment what environment would they do best in an urban setting where there's a lot of stimulation, or in a more isolated or rural setting. So I would love to say that it's a science, but it's still an art, and part of it is the assessment, part of it is reality, and so much of it is really getting to the point of feeling that you've found it. You know, when you look around, visit, shop, talk to other people, it comes together.
Yeah. Well, I don't know.
It's important to get out there and
Sometimes
look.
it's just, I think that's the key, is getting out there and looking and examining every possibility.
And keeping an open mind.
And keeping a very open mind.
And also not being too concerned that this has to be forever. It's not that you want to change things every year, but when I have worked with when I work with families with very younger children who are in the transition years or prior to graduating, they feel compelled to make the right decision forever. And sometimes that gets you so bound up, so stuck, because if you remember that we have not been in the same setting when we're 22 than we were when we're 32 or 42. And it helps you relax a little bit and come up with what seems right for the foreseeable future. And the person will grow and change, and they'll give you the cues about what might be different later.
Okay. How do you help prepare your disabled child for independent living? What steps can you take?
Well, if they want to move out, that makes it easier.
Yeah, that's true. But I mean, what happens if they can't move out, or they're not capable of, living independently?
It's definitely a mutual decision. We address in the book, and also one of the programs that Till runs called Springboard, which is a social club that gets people together without having to put them in a position that they may have to leave the comfort of their family home. The two-way decision is sometimes the individual is not ready and is saying, I like it here, I like the support, I like the love and the nurturing that I get. Sometimes families, the hardest thing is, as the book says, letting go. So somehow, if you can start with the more, the less controversial things, the socializing, the looking around to see where is it that there might be groups or activities, whether it's bowling or skiing or just getting together. So getting the person used to the idea that life might be a lot of fun outside of the family home.
Right.
Then the assessment does help you to come up with some concrete things. It could be cooking, for example, not that you have to know how to cook independently when you're on your own, but just getting people started with participating in the daily routines long before they're ready to move.
Right.
The personal care skills, the laundry, really starting to see them as an adult.
Right.
And sometimes the two don't come together, and you might have to get to the point of saying, now's the time we're going to do it.
Yep. Now, can you wait? What happens if your child, say for instance, is not in a residential situation? Before they turn 22, they're living at home. How difficult and is it to get them into like a residential placement?
Well,
Very difficult.
yeah, it depends on their level of need, I think, number one. If you have, like my son Jack I have a 29-year-old with a developmental disability, and Jack needs 24/7 care, and so he's in a group home. And how we got him into a group home was that he started in a residential school when he was 17, so then he moved into the adult residential system when he was 22, and that's one way. But I recognize that there are thousands of young adults that's not an option for. But if your child is like my Jack and needs 24/7 care, then the only agency that is going to fund that is the Department of Developmental Services. It would be Dafina, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but I think that's probably $60,000 to $70,000 a year just for the residents, because you're paying for the staff, because you're paying for that staffing level. So, so to get your child into a 24/7 residence funded by DDS, first of all, they have to, acknowledge that your child does need that level of need, and you also have to be a priority one, meaning that the parent is elderly or disabled, or there is something going on in the home that makes them more of a priority than someone else. So that's really difficult. But then if your child needs less support, then more options open up, because you're not relying on the state to provide all of the funding. So Dafina runs some of those programs, so you can tell us about those.
It's unfortunately very difficult to get in. It's sometimes difficult to get funded even if you are transitioning from a residential setting prior to 22. So much of it depends on the state budget, and there are two priorities after the initial assessment from the right agency. You get priority one, and priority one does not automatically get a placement upon graduation, but it is constantly being sought for. So if you're a priority one, it might take a year or so, but everyone within the agency knows that that person's a priority one. And priority one is based on need, and it's also based on the family's, not financial, but their physical situation. If there might be an inability to care because of medical needs or difficulty. So I can't emphasize enough that advocating for yourself, making yourself very well known to the funding agency. And
it seems like that's the case for everything,
no matter what.
And it isn't
the
disabled world, yes.
Well, it's actually the same for everything in this world.
Yeah, that's true.
So don't worry about being persistent, tenacious, and just making yourself known to the right area, the local group that's responsible. you can get funded even if you're a priority 2, and then the
Yeah.
decision is, do you take what's available or do you create something that's new?
And then what about a level 3? Is that the
There
the
is no
lowest?
level 3.
There is either one or 2.
Right, which makes it easy. It's yes or no.
Yes or no. I have a question. When should parents consider guardianship? I mean, that's a big issue as far as the transition into 22. I mean, some of these disabled kids just don't have the right mindset to make medical decisions and things of that nature. So what do you do about that?
Well, when your child's 18, that's when you, or before they're 18, you need to think about and plan for it, because here in Massachusetts, when your child is 18, they're presumed to be an adult. They are an adult, and they're presumed.
Even though they're disabled?
Yes, they're
really?
presumed to be capable of making their own decisions. So even though they have intellectual disability or serious mental illness, they're presumed to be capable. So if you want to continue to make decisions for them, you need to pursue guardianship. And it can often be a good idea, because you don't have to deal with the medical privacy issues.
Right.
Doctors may not want to talk to you if your child is over 18.
If you're not a guardian, then they don't have the right.
Unless your child tells them that they can talk
that they
to
can
you.
talk to you.
You don't know
That's
what they're going to say.
I mean, I've known some people in the mental health field, and they've had guardianship, but they somehow weren't allowed to find out anything from their psychiatrist or anything like that. Can they demand that if you're a guardian?
Yes, I think you can.
Yeah.
Because there shouldn't be any privacy between a guardian and a treatment provider.
Okay.
In the mental health world, sometimes the therapeutic relationship trumps the guardianship. If you push it, you are allowed to get the information, but very often the mental health professional will say that they don't want to divulge that private information,
Right.
but you have to take more legal or affirmative steps to get it, if it makes sense.
Yeah.
And then decide also if your child's privacy is more important than your knowing. Well,
So,
and think about your other children too. I mean, there may
Right.
be information that they, private, personal information that they don't want to give you, and you would respect that. And maybe sometimes, you need to respect that for your disabled child too.
what are going to be your financial obligations as far as your child turning 22?
Well, that's a great question. When our children turn 18, here in Massachusetts, we as parents have no financial obligations toward them. So they're considered adults and independent. So for purposes of getting the state to give them benefits, they don't look at our income, and they don't look at our resources anymore.
Oh, I see. Okay.
However,
But I mean, what happens if you go towards the more independent route, where they have their own apartment or whatever? I mean, does the state still support them?
There are some programs that pay support, but if you can't get that funding for your child, then you may have to step up and contribute on your own.
Yeah.
You're not legally obligated to. Many families, if they are not prioritized or if they're not getting funding one way or another, they may start and initiate payment to support the placement that they're creating. And then it's very hard to go back and say to the state agency
I can't
that you
afford
would
it
like
anymore.
funding. It has happened over and over again. And families feel they were penalized for taking the initiative and saving the state money. That in fact was one of the lawsuits back in 1990. two that started, in 95 that started, which was the waiting list lawsuit, and that was really what generated a lot of new programs. Families said, we've been waiting, we did things on our own, we saved the state money, and over 2,400 families sued the state and got funding for 5 years, and there were 2,400 families who were offered placement over a 5-year period.
And I think you said you answered this question before, but when is it ever, do you feel personally that it's an advantage for a disabled person to live at home the rest of their lives?
Personally, right?
Personally, on a personal note. I know that they can, but do you feel there's any benefit to that?
Well, the benefit is the long-term stability and nurturing. This isn't an indictment or a negative statement. Depending on your philosophy of adulthood and independence, I have the same approach for everyone, which is that independence and living away from your initial birth home, family home, is advantageous to get the most out of life. But there are some nuclear families, there are some generational families that don't have that point of view, and I don't think it's wrong, but personally...
But what happens, say for instance, when the parents pass away and this child is left with no one? I mean, it's a shock to the poor child.
Well, with no one and without the skills and the social support and the benefit of 20, 30 years of adulthood of feeling like you're your own person. So it just depends on the family. My personal view is that life is more interesting when you are living amongst some peers and getting, moving on to the next step of development, of anyone's development, with a disability or not. But it's a personal decision.
Barbara, how do you feel about that?
Well, I tend to share that, and my, I guess the point I would make is that most children outlive their parents. So there's the difficult reality that we're going to die before our children, so our children are not going to be at home with us forever. And then it's not always that clean. Here I am, and I have a nice life here with my child, and then I'm gone. Well, there's a lot in there. There's the decline and the disability and the very messy reality of not being able to take care of your child, not being able to take care of yourself.
Right.
So that's why I like to see families think about that and plan for it.
Right.
Instead of just hoping for the best and
Well, what happens when you discover that the residential placement or whatever placement that you end up putting your child in is definitely the wrong choice, and you have to remove your child from whatever that situation is immediately? What do you do?
Well, if it's immediate, I guess you're referring to something like an
abuse situation, or they're just not doing well. The staff seems to be not supportive.
Well, if it's an immediate situation, there are quite a few measures in Massachusetts that make sure that something that's immediate abusive will not go on beyond the few minutes after it's identified. It's the more harder issue of it doesn't feel right. A lot of what you should do in Massachusetts is extremely responsive to families' input, but you should continue to be involved with what goes on so that it's not a sudden realization that this isn't right. Ideally, try and work it out with the group, but then with the agency that's doing it. But if that doesn't work, you should definitely deal with the funding source, because they will orchestrate meetings to determine whether it can be changed or it really needs to be moved. Somebody needs to be moved.
Okay, and Barbara, what do you think about that?
Oh, I agree. I don't think the state funding agency wants to or should be paying for a placement that's not working for the person. So I think it's...
Well, I thank you both for coming today and being guests on our show. Don't forget, if you have further questions, you can contact me on Facebook .com YNADIS, or email me at susancauley@gmail.com. Thank you for joining us. See you next time on You're Not Alone, Surviving Your Child's Disability.